The morning light from 3 different suns streamed through the crystal windows of the Galactic Academy's largest lecture hall. Students from dozens of worlds filled the curved rows of seats that stretched up toward the domed ceiling. Their various breathing masks, environmental suits, and translation devices created a symphony of soft mechanical sounds that had become the background music of interstellar education. Professor Veltar stood at the center of the stage, his tall blue-skinned frame moving gracefully as he gestured toward the massive holographic display floating above his head. The Zephyrian professor was considered one of the galaxy's leading experts on dangerous life forms, and his reputation had drawn students from across known space to attend his advanced xenobiology courses. Today we discuss one of the most important survival skills any spacefaring species must master, Veltar announced, his voice carrying clearly through the hall's sound system. Understanding apex predators and how to survive encounters with them. The hologram above shifted to show a massive, tentacled creature with rows of razor-sharp teeth. Several students in the front row instinctively leaned back in their seats. The Catherian death squid, Veltar continued, pointing at the image with his laser pointer, native to the water worlds of the Outer Rim. Notice the characteristics that make it an apex predator. Superior speed, with tentacles that can move faster than most spacecraft. Incredible strength capable of crushing a small moon. And most importantly, intelligence that rivals that of most spacefaring species. The image changed to show different creatures from various worlds. Each one looked more terrifying than the last. There was the crystal spider from the Silicon worlds, whose body could reflect and redirect energy weapons. The shadow wolf from the dark side of Proxima 7, which could become invisible in low light. The thunderbird from the storm planets, whose wings could generate electromagnetic pulses that disabled electronics. What do all these creatures have in common? Veltar asked the class. A student with 6 arms and compound eyes raised one of her limbs. They are all perfectly adapted to their environments, Professor. Correct, Zixara. And what does this mean for us? A reptilian student from the hot worlds hissed his answer through his breathing apparatus. It means we cannot compete with them using the same methods they use. Exactly right, Slar. Veltar nodded approvingly. When faced with an apex predator, there are 3 basic survival strategies that have proven successful across the galaxy. First, avoidance. Don't go where they live. Second, appeasement. Give them what they want so they leave you alone. Third, escape. Run away as fast as possible and don't look back. The professor touched his control pad, and the hologram changed to show various scenarios of different species successfully using these strategies. There were images of space stations built far from dangerous worlds, of trading ships leaving offerings for space pirates, and of fast scout ships designed purely for escape. These strategies have kept our civilized species alive for thousands of years, Veltar said with obvious pride. They represent the triumph of intelligence over brute force, of civilization over savagery. In the back corner of the lecture hall, a human student named Marcus Chen sat quietly taking notes on his tablet. He was one of only 3 humans attending the academy this semester, and at first glance he seemed unremarkable. Average height, brown hair, wearing the standard academy uniform. Nothing about him suggested he was particularly dangerous or special. Marcus had been listening carefully to the lecture, but something about the professor's confident tone bothered him. He thought about his own species' history, about the stories his grandfather had told him about Earth's ancient past. Humans had never been the strongest or fastest creatures on their home world, yet they had become the dominant species. They had faced creatures much more dangerous than themselves and found ways to survive and thrive. These 3 strategies have proven themselves time and again, Veltar continued. Avoidance, appeasement, and escape. There simply are no other viable options when facing a true apex predator. Marcus raised his hand. The professor paused, noticing the human student for the first time. Yes, you have a question, Mr. Chen, Marcus Chen. The human stood up slowly, his voice calm and clear. Professor, what if you can't run away? What if you can't hide? And what if you have nothing to give them? A ripple of nervous chittering, hissing, and mechanical sounds spread through the lecture hall. Several students turned to stare at Marcus with expressions that ranged from confusion to horror. Professor Veltar blinked his large silver eyes. I'm sorry, could you repeat the question? What if you're trapped with an apex predator? No way out, no way to hide, nothing to bargain with. What then? The professor's confident smile wavered slightly. Well, in such a scenario, I suppose, the situation would be quite hopeless. That's precisely why we focus on the 3 proven strategies. The key is to never allow yourself to be trapped in such a situation. But sometimes you don't have a choice, Marcus said quietly. Sometimes bad things happen and you have to deal with them anyway. The lecture hall had gone completely silent except for the soft humming of life support systems. Even the translation devices seemed to be working more quietly, as if they too were listening carefully to this strange conversation. Veltar straightened to his full height, his professional pride clearly stung. Young human, I appreciate your curiosity, but I think you may not fully understand the nature of apex predators. These are not the small primitive creatures from your home world. These are beings that have evolved to be perfect killing machines. No amount of wishful thinking or primitive courage can overcome millions of years of evolutionary refinement. Marcus nodded politely. I understand, Professor. These creatures are perfectly adapted to be predators. But I was wondering, has anyone ever tried a different approach? What do you mean? Well, all 3 of your strategies are based on the idea that we can't compete with apex predators directly. But what if the goal isn't to compete with them? What if there was a 4th option? The professor's expression shifted from mild annoyance to genuine curiosity. A 4th option, such as? Marcus was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. What if instead of running from their strengths, you used their strengths against them? The silence in the lecture hall became so complete that Marcus could hear his own heartbeat. Every student, regardless of species, was staring at him with expressions of fascination and disbelief. Professor Veltar's scientific curiosity was clearly warring with his professional skepticism. That's an interesting theoretical concept, Mr. Chen, but I'm afraid it's purely academic. No one has ever successfully implemented such a strategy against a true apex predator. Has anyone ever tried? The professor paused, considering the question seriously. Not to my knowledge, no. The risk would be far too great. Marcus sat back down, but his hand remained slightly raised. Professor, would it be possible to arrange a demonstration? The lecture hall erupted in shocked gasps, mechanical whirs, and alien exclamations of disbelief. Several students actually stood up in their seats as if preparing to flee from the mere suggestion. Professor Veltar stared at the human student for a long moment, his silver eyes wide with something that might have been either admiration or concern for Marcus's mental health. Mr. Chen, he said slowly, are you seriously suggesting that you would like to test your theoretical approach against an actual apex predator? Marcus nodded calmly. If it's possible, yes, sir. I think it would be educational. The professor looked around the lecture hall, seeing the intense interest on every student's face. His scientific mind was already racing with possibilities, while his survival instincts were screaming warnings. Well, he said finally, I suppose we could arrange something controlled. The lecture hall buzzed with excited conversation as students discussed what they had just witnessed. Professor Veltar dismissed the class early, but asked Marcus to remain behind. As the other students filed out, chattering in their various languages about the crazy human who wanted to fight an apex predator, Marcus gathered his belongings and walked down to the front of the hall. Mr. Chen, Professor Veltar said, his tone serious but not unkind, I need to make sure you understand what you're suggesting. When I speak of apex predators, I'm not talking about the large animals from your homeworld. I'm talking about creatures that have driven entire species to extinction. Marcus nodded. I understand, Professor. What did you have in mind for the demonstration? Veltar touched his control pad, and the hologram above them shifted to show a new creature. This one made all the previous images look friendly by comparison. It was roughly the size of a small spacecraft, with a body that seemed to absorb light itself. 6 burning red eyes glowed from what might have been its head, and its limbs ended in claws that looked like they could tear through metal. The Void Stalker, Veltar said quietly. From the Andromeda sector. They are perhaps the most dangerous predators known to galactic science, faster than most vehicles, stronger than construction mechs, and intelligent enough to solve complex problems. They hunt by scent, sound, heat, electromagnetic signatures, and several other methods we don't fully understand. Marcus studied the image carefully. How big are they? An adult male is roughly 3 meters tall and 5 meters long. They weigh approximately 800 kilograms. Their claws can cut through standard hull plating, and their bite force exceeds that of most industrial equipment. What makes them so successful as hunters? Professor Veltar seemed pleased by the question. Everything about them is perfectly designed for killing. They never tire, they never give up, and they never make mistakes. Once a void stalker decides to hunt something, that target will be dead within hours. There has never been a recorded case of any sentient being surviving a direct encounter with a void stalker. Marcus was quiet for a moment, still studying the hologram. Do you have one here? The Academy keeps one adult male in the research facility for study purposes. It's in a specialized containment unit that took our best engineers 3 years to design. Even then we've had to modify it twice because the creature kept finding ways to almost escape. Could we use it for the demonstration? Professor Veltar's blue skin seemed to pale slightly. Mr. Chen, I hope you understand that this creature represents everything I've been teaching about apex predators. It embodies pure, refined lethality. There would be no room for error, no second chances, no safety net. I understand. The academic committee would never approve such a dangerous experiment based on an untested theory. Marcus thought for a moment. What if I could provide some evidence that my approach might work? Something to show that it's worth testing? The professor's curiosity was clearly winning the battle against his common sense. What kind of evidence? Give me access to your research data on the Void Stalker. Let me study its behavior patterns, its hunting methods, its psychology. If I can show you a detailed plan that has a reasonable chance of success, would you consider arranging the demonstration? Veltar was quiet for several minutes, his silver eyes studying Marcus intently. You realize that if your plan fails, you would die very quickly and very violently. The Academy would face massive legal issues. My career would be ruined, and we would learn nothing except that humans are capable of spectacular suicide. But if it works? If it works, Veltar said slowly, it would revolutionize everything we know about survival strategies. It would be the most significant advancement in xenobiological studies in over a century. Marcus waited patiently while the professor considered the options. There would have to be conditions, Veltar said finally. Multiple safety protocols, emergency extraction procedures, a full medical team standing by, and the demonstration would have to take place in a controlled environment where we could terminate the experiment instantly if things went wrong. That sounds reasonable. And you would have to sign about 50 different legal documents taking full responsibility for your own safety. Okay. Professor Veltar shook his head in amazement. Mr. Chen, I have to ask, why are you willing to risk your life for this? Marcus was quiet for a moment, thinking about how to explain something that seemed obvious to him but apparently wasn't obvious to anyone else in the galaxy. Professor, humans spent thousands of years sharing our world with creatures that were bigger, stronger, and faster than us. We didn't survive by avoiding them or appeasing them or running away from them. We survived by figuring out how to be smarter than them. But surely you had weapons. Tools, technology? Not at first. For most of our history, we had nothing but our brains and our ability to work together. We learned to hunt creatures that could have killed us easily in a fair fight. We did it by making sure the fight was never fair. Veltar nodded slowly. I see. And you believe these ancient strategies could work against modern apex predators? I think the principles are the same. A predator is a predator, whether it evolved on Earth 1 million years ago or in the Andromeda sector last week. They all have the same basic programming. Find prey, catch prey, kill prey. That programming is their strength, but it's also their weakness. How so? Marcus smiled for the first time since the conversation began. Because when you're really good at one thing, it becomes harder to adapt when someone changes the rules of the game. Professor Veltar looked at the hologram of the Void Stalker, then back at Marcus. I'll give you access to our research files. You'll have 1 week to develop your plan and present it to the academic committee. If they approve the demonstration, we'll proceed. If not, then at least I tried. Very well. But Mr. Chen, I want you to spend some time really thinking about this. The research data will show you exactly how dangerous these creatures are. Once you see what we're really talking about, you might change your mind. Marcus gathered his belongings and headed toward the door. Professor, can I ask you something? Of course. In all your research on apex predators, have you ever studied human beings? Veltar looked confused. Humans? Why would I study humans? You're not apex predators. You're not even particularly dangerous compared to most species. Marcus paused at the door and looked back at his professor. Maybe that's something worth thinking about too. As Marcus left the lecture hall, Professor Veltar stood alone with the hologram of the Void Stalker floating above him. For the first time in his long academic career, he found himself wondering if there might be something important he had overlooked. He made a mental note to add human beings to his research list. Word spread through the Galactic Academy faster than a quantum transmission. By the next morning, everyone from first-year students to senior faculty members had heard about the human who wanted to face a Void Stalker in single combat. The story grew with each telling, becoming more fantastic and unbelievable with every conversation. Marcus spent the week buried in the research facility's data archives, studying every piece of information the Academy had collected about Void Stalkers over the past 50 years. The files contained detailed behavioral studies, hunting pattern analyses, physiological data, and psychological profiles. The more he read, the more confident he became that his approach would work. Professor Veltar checked on him regularly, each time expecting to find that Marcus had changed his mind after seeing the full scope of what he was proposing to face. Instead, he found the human student taking careful notes and making detailed diagrams of what appeared to be some kind of plan. "Have you found anything interesting?" Veltar asked during one of his visits. Marcus looked up from a particularly dense research paper about Void Stalker sensory capabilities. "They're even more specialized than I thought. Look at this." He pointed to a section of data about the creature's hunting behavior. "They have 17 different sensory systems for tracking prey. Heat detection, electromagnetic sensing, chemical analysis, vibration detection, even something called quantum resonance scanning. Yes, that's what makes them so effective. No prey can hide from them. But look at how they process all this information." Marcus highlighted several passages in the research. Their brains are structured to prioritize sensory input, based on threat assessment and hunting efficiency. When multiple senses detect conflicting information, they default to the most reliable source. Professor Veltar leaned closer to read the highlighted text. "I'm not sure I follow your point. Their sensory system is designed to eliminate confusion and focus on the most important target. It's incredibly efficient for hunting, but what happens when someone deliberately creates conflicting sensory information? The data doesn't address that scenario." "Exactly. Because no one has ever tried it." Marcus showed him another section of research. "And look at their learning patterns. They're extremely good at adapting to new prey behaviors, but only within predictable parameters. They expect prey to run, hide, fight back, or freeze. All their adaptations are based on those 4 responses. What other responses could there be?" Marcus smiled. "That's what we're going to find out." By the end of the week, Marcus had filled 3 notebooks with observations and plans. He had identified what he believed were exploitable weaknesses in the Void Stalker's hunting system, and he had developed a strategy that he was confident would work. Professor Veltar arranged for him to present his plan to the academic committee, a group of senior faculty members from various departments who would have to approve any potentially dangerous experiments. The committee meeting took place in a small conference room, deep in the Academy's administrative section. 7 professors from different species sat around a circular table, reviewing Marcus's written proposal and the supporting research data. "This is highly irregular," said Professor Krentel, a crystalline being from the Silicon Coalition. "We've never approved an experiment that deliberately puts a student in mortal danger. The safety protocols are extensive," Veltar pointed out. "Emergency extraction systems, medical teams, multiple backup plans. We can terminate the experiment at any time." Professor Jara, a tentacled academic from the ocean worlds, made a skeptical noise. "But the fundamental premise is flawed. This human believes he can outsmart a creature that has been hunting successfully for millions of years. It's like claiming you can teach mathematics to a quantum computer." Marcus cleared his throat politely. "If I may, Professor Jara, I think that's exactly my point." The committee turned to look at him. "A quantum computer is incredibly good at quantum calculations, but it can't write poetry. The Void Stalker is incredibly good at hunting, but that specialization might also be a limitation." "Explain," said Professor Krentel. Marcus stood and activated the room's holographic display. "Every adaptation is also a constraint. The Void Stalker's sensory system is designed to track fleeing prey, Identify hiding spots and counter defensive behaviors. But what if the target doesn't run, hide, or fight back? Then the target dies very quickly, said Professor Yixin, a bird-like creature from the high-gravity worlds. Maybe. Or maybe the Voidstalker's behavioral programming doesn't know how to respond to something completely outside its experience. Marcus changed the hologram to show his detailed analysis of Voidstalker hunting patterns. Look at these behavioral trees. Every recorded hunt follows similar patterns. Identify target, pursue target, eliminate target. The variations are all tactical, not strategic. The committee studied the data silently. What exactly are you proposing to do? Asked Professor Jara. I'm going to confuse it. The room erupted in surprised exclamations and mechanical noises from various species. Confuse it? Professor Krentel's crystalline form flickered with what might have been amusement. You're going to confuse one of the galaxy's most intelligent predators? Intelligence isn't the same as adaptability, Marcus explained. The Voidstalker is intelligent within its specialized domain, but that intelligence is focused entirely on hunting. If I can create a situation that falls outside its hunting algorithms, it might not know how to respond. Professor Veltar leaned forward. Show them the sensory conflict scenario. Marcus changed the display to show a complex diagram of overlapping sensory inputs. The Voidstalker's brain processes multiple sensory streams simultaneously to build a complete picture of its environment. But what happens when those sensory streams contradict each other? The creature would adapt and compensate, said Professor Yixin. Up to a point, yes, but every system has limits. If I can create enough contradictory information across enough sensory channels simultaneously, the creature's brain might experience something like an overload. The committee was quiet for several minutes, studying Marcus's research and his proposed experimental protocol. The safety measures are adequate, Professor Krentel said finally. And the research methodology is sound, but the risk level is still extreme. I understand the risks, Marcus said quietly, but I also think this could be important, not just for academic knowledge, but for practical survival. There are a lot of dangerous creatures in the galaxy, and we keep discovering new ones. If there's a fourth survival strategy that works, don't we have a responsibility to explore it? Professor Jara's tentacles writhed thoughtfully. You really believe this approach could work? I do. Why? Marcus was quiet for a moment, thinking about how to explain something that felt instinctive to him but was clearly foreign to everyone else in the room. Because that's how humans survived. We weren't the strongest or fastest or toughest creatures on our world, but we learned to think differently. We learned to change the rules of the game instead of playing by someone else's rules. The committee voted. 4 in favor, 3 against. The demonstration was approved. Professor Veltar announced the results to Marcus after the committee members had left. The experiment is scheduled for next week. The entire academy will be watching. Good, Marcus said. I hope they learn something useful. As they walked back toward the research facility to begin final preparations, Professor Veltar asked the question that had been bothering him all week. Mr. Chen, aren't you afraid? Marcus thought about it seriously before answering. Of course I'm afraid. Fear keeps you alive. But being afraid and being paralyzed by fear are two different things. Sometimes you have to do scary things because they're important. Professor Veltar nodded slowly, beginning to understand that there might be more to this unremarkable human student than he had initially realized. The demonstration was set for the following Monday. Marcus had 6 days to prepare for the most dangerous exam of his life. The observation deck of the Academy's biological research facility had never held so many people. Students, faculty, and even visiting dignitaries from other worlds packed the reinforced viewing area that looked down into the testing arena. The arena itself was a sterile white chamber, roughly 50 meters square, with smooth walls that offered no hiding places and no escape routes. Marcus stood in the preparation room, checking his equipment one final time. He had refused all offers of weapons or protective gear, instead carrying only a small bag filled with items from the Academy commissary. Salt, pepper, small mirrors, food pellets, aromatic herbs, a few pieces of colored cloth, and several other seemingly harmless objects. Professor Veltar joined him in the preparation room, his blue skin showing obvious signs of stress. Are you certain about this, Mr. Chen? Even with all our safety protocols, there's still enormous risk. Marcus nodded calmly. I'm ready, Professor. The emergency extraction system can pull you out of the arena in under 3 seconds. but you have to activate your emergency beacon. Don't try to be heroic if things go wrong. Understood. Through the preparation room's window, they could see the Void Stalker being moved into the arena in a specialized containment unit. The creature was even more terrifying in person than in the holograms. Its black, light-absorbing skin seemed to create shadows even in the bright arena lighting. Its 6 red eyes moved independently, scanning the environment with predatory intelligence. In the observation deck above, hundreds of beings from dozens of species watched in fascination and horror as the containment unit was positioned at the far end of the arena from where Marcus would enter. "Final safety check," announced the facility's head of security through the communication system. "All extraction systems are operational. Medical teams are standing by. Emergency protocols are in effect." Marcus picked up his bag of supplies and walked toward the arena entrance. "See you after the demonstration, Professor." The entrance sealed behind him with a soft hiss, leaving Marcus alone in the white chamber with 50 meters of empty space between him and the containment unit holding one of the galaxy's most dangerous predators. In the observation deck, the crowd had gone completely silent. Even the mechanical sounds of breathing apparatus and translation devices seemed muted. Professor Veltar's voice came through the arena's communication system. "Mr. Chen, the Void Stalker will be released in 30 seconds. Are you ready?" Marcus stood calmly in the center of the arena, his bag of supplies at his feet. "Ready, Professor." Releasing the Void Stalker in 10 seconds. The creature's red eyes focused on Marcus through the transparent walls of its containment unit. Its body tensed in preparation for the hunt. 5 seconds. Marcus reached into his bag and pulled out a small mirror. Releasing now. The containment unit's door slid open with a mechanical whisper. For a moment, the Void Stalker remained motionless, its predatory senses analyzing this new environment and the strange creature standing calmly in the center of the arena. Then it moved. The Void Stalker exploded from the containment unit with shocking speed, its powerful limbs propelling it across the arena floor like a missile of living darkness. Its claws extended, its jaw opened to reveal rows of gleaming teeth, and its 6 eyes locked onto Marcus with absolute predatory focus. In the observation deck, several spectators involuntarily stepped back from the windows despite the reinforced barriers. This was what apex predation looked like. Pure, refined lethality in motion. Marcus waited until the creature was less than 10 meters away, then threw the mirror at the floor directly in front of the Void Stalker. The mirror shattered on impact, creating a spray of reflective fragments. The Void Stalker's momentum carried it into the glittering field of broken glass, and suddenly it found itself surrounded by dozens of fractured reflections of its own image. The creature skidded to a halt, its head swiveling rapidly as its visual processing systems tried to make sense of what it was seeing. Each fragment showed a slightly different angle of its own reflection, creating a kaleidoscope of conflicting visual information. Marcus immediately tossed a handful of strongly scented herbs into the air around the confused predator. The Void Stalker's chemical sensors detected multiple sources of the same scent coming from different directions, contradicting its visual input about the location of these objects. While the creature was still processing this sensory contradiction, Marcus pulled out several small food pellets and threw them in different directions around the arena, not at the Void Stalker but past it, creating a pattern that would require the creature to turn and move in specific ways to investigate each new sound. The Void Stalker's hunting instincts kicked in. Its brain identified multiple potential targets and began calculating optimal pursuit patterns. But as it moved to investigate the first food pellet, it stepped on more mirror fragments, creating additional reflections. When it turned toward the second pellet, its movement created air currents that carried the scattered herbs in new directions, generating fresh, contradictory scent trails. Marcus continued this careful orchestration, always staying in motion but never running away. He threw colored cloth strips that fluttered in the air circulation, creating visual distractions that didn't match any of the creature's prey identification patterns. He scattered salt and pepper to create taste sensations that confused the Void Stalker's chemical analysis systems. To the observers in the deck above, it looked like an impossible dance between predator and prey. But Marcus wasn't dancing with the Void Stalker. He was dancing with its sensory systems, creating a symphony of conflicting information that the creature's specialized brain couldn't process effectively. The Void Stalker's movements became increasingly erratic. Its hunting algorithms were designed to track fleeing prey, identify hiding spots, and counter defensive behaviors. But Marcus wasn't fleeing, hiding, or fighting back. He was creating a constantly changing environment where none of the creature's sensory inputs provided consistent, actionable information. Every time the Void Stalker tried to focus on Marcus as its primary target, a new contradiction would pull its attention elsewhere. The reflection of its own movement in the mirror fragments triggered its territorial instincts. The scattered food pellets activated its feeding responses. The random sense and visual distractions created false targets that its hunting systems couldn't ignore. The creature's 6 eyes began moving independently, each trying to track different elements of the chaos Marcus had created. Its head swiveled rapidly back and forth as it tried to prioritize the flood of contradictory sensory information. Marcus pulled out his final tool, a small device that emitted a soft, rhythmic clicking sound. The Void Stalker's auditory systems locked onto this new input, but the sound didn't match any of its prey identification patterns. It wasn't the sound of breathing, heartbeats, footsteps, or any other biological signature the creature had evolved to recognize. The clicking was random enough to prevent pattern recognition, but regular enough to demand attention from the creature's threat assessment systems. Combined with all the other contradictory inputs, it created the final layer of confusion that pushed the Void Stalker's specialized brain beyond its processing limits. The great predator sat down heavily in the middle of the arena, surrounded by mirror fragments, scattered herbs, and conflicting sensory data. Its 6 eyes moved independently, trying to track dozens of inputs simultaneously. It made a soft, confused sound, something between a whimper and a growl. Marcus slowly approached the sitting creature, moving calmly and deliberately. The Void Stalker watched him approach but made no aggressive moves. Its brain was too overwhelmed by contradictory information to generate a coherent hunting response. When Marcus was close enough to touch the creature, he reached into his bag and pulled out a food pellet. He placed it gently on the ground directly in front of the Void Stalker. The creature looked at the food pellet, then at Marcus, then back at the food pellet. After a moment of apparent consideration, it ate the pellet. In the observation deck above, the silence was absolute. Hundreds of beings from across the galaxy stared down at the impossible scene in the arena. One of the most dangerous predators in known space sitting peacefully while a human hand-fed it snacks. Marcus looked up at the observation deck and spoke into his communication device. "You can turn off the emergency protocols now, Professor. I think we're done here." The demonstration had lasted exactly 18 minutes and 37 seconds. In that time, Marcus had accomplished something that galactic science had considered impossible. He had neutralized an apex predator without violence, without weapons, and without escape. He had done it by turning the creature's greatest strengths into its greatest weaknesses, proving that sometimes the most sophisticated systems can be defeated by the simplest strategies. The age of human expansion across the galaxy was about to accelerate significantly. The observation deck remained silent for a full minute after Marcus finished speaking. Hundreds of beings from dozens of worlds stared down at the arena, where a human stood calmly next to a Void Stalker that was contentedly eating food pellets from his hand. Professor Veltar was the first to move. He activated the arena's communication system, his voice somewhat shaky as he spoke. "Mr. Chen, are you injured in any way?" Marcus looked up at the observation deck and smiled. "No injuries, Professor. Everything went according to plan." "According to plan?" Professor Krentel's crystalline form flickered rapidly as he leaned toward the window. "You planned for the creature to sit down and accept food from you?" "That was the expected outcome, yes." In the arena, the Void Stalker had finished the food pellet and was looking around with what appeared to be mild confusion. Its 6 eyes were no longer moving independently, and its aggressive posture had completely relaxed. It seemed almost peaceful. Professor Jara's tentacles writhed with excitement. "How is this possible? Everything we know about Void Stalker behavior suggests this scenario should be impossible." Marcus picked up his bag and began walking toward the arena exit, the Void Stalker watching him go with what looked like casual interest rather than predatory hunger. "That's exactly the point, Professor Jara. Everything you know about Void Stalker behavior is based on normal predator-prey interactions. But this wasn't a normal interaction." The arena door sealed behind Marcus as he entered the preparation area. Through the window, they could see the Void Stalker still sitting among the scattered mirror fragments and herbs, looking around the arena with apparent bewilderment. Professor Veltar met Marcus in the preparation area, his blue skin still showing signs of stress despite the successful outcome. "Mr. Chen, I need you to explain exactly what happened in there, step by step." Marcus set down his bag and activated the room's holographic display, calling up the arena's sensor recordings of the demonstration. The key was understanding that the Void Stalker's hunting success comes from its sensory integration systems. It processes multiple types of input simultaneously to build a complete picture of its environment and its prey. The hologram showed the creature's initial charge and its sudden confusion when it encountered the mirror fragments. Every sense it uses for hunting can be turned into a source of confusion if you provide the right kind of contradictory information. The mirrors created visual contradictions. It kept seeing its own reflection from multiple angles, which triggered territorial responses that conflicted with its hunting instincts. "But surely it would adapt to that quickly," said Professor Krentel, who had joined them in the preparation room along with several other committee members. "It would have if that had been the only contradiction. But I layered multiple sensory conflicts on top of each other. The scattered herbs created scent trails that didn't match the visual information. The food pellets generated sounds that suggested multiple prey animals in different locations. The colored cloth created movement patterns that didn't correspond to any known prey behavior." Marcus advanced the recording to show the Void Stalker's increasingly erratic movements. Each individual contradiction would have been manageable, but the combination created a cascade failure in its sensory processing systems. Its brain couldn't establish a clear target priority because every sense was providing conflicting information. Professor Yixin fluffed her feathers nervously. "But what about its intelligence? Void Stalkers are known to be extremely smart." "They're smart within their specialized domain," Marcus agreed. "They can solve complex hunting problems, adapt to new prey behaviors, and even use tools when necessary. But that intelligence is focused entirely on predation. When faced with a situation that falls completely outside their hunting algorithms, they don't know how to respond." The hologram showed the moment when the Void Stalker sat down, overwhelmed by the sensory chaos Marcus had created. "Think about it this way," Marcus continued. "Imagine the galaxy's best quantum physicist trying to perform surgery, or the greatest artist trying to pilot a spacecraft. Intelligence in one area doesn't automatically transfer to completely different domains." Professor Veltar nodded slowly. "You created a scenario that was outside its expertise." "Exactly. The Void Stalker's brain is optimized for hunting. But what I created wasn't a hunting scenario. It was a puzzle that required a completely different type of thinking." The committee members exchanged glances, the implications of what they had witnessed beginning to sink in. "This changes everything we know about apex predator encounters," Professor Jara said quietly. "If this technique can be applied to other species." "It can," Marcus said confidently. "The specific methods would be different for each predator, but the principle is the same. Every apex predator is successful because it's perfectly adapted to its environment and its prey. But that specialization is also a vulnerability." Professor Krentel's crystalline form brightened with excitement. "You're suggesting that the more specialized a predator becomes, the more susceptible it is to this type of confusion attack?" "That's the theory. The most dangerous predators are also the most predictable, because their behavior is constrained by their evolutionary programming." In the arena, the Void Stalker had stood up and was walking slowly around the space, occasionally sniffing at the scattered herbs or stepping carefully around the mirror fragments. It showed no signs of aggression or even interest in hunting. "How long will the effect last?" asked Professor Veltar. "Hard to say. Once the contradictory stimuli are removed and its environment returns to normal, it should recover its normal hunting instincts fairly quickly. But the experience might make it more cautious about situations that don't fit its usual patterns." Marcus began packing his remaining supplies back into his bag. "The important thing is that we've proven it's possible. Apex predators aren't invincible. They're just really good at what they do. And anything that's really good at one specific thing is probably not very good at other things." Professor Yixin tilted her head thoughtfully. "This explains something that has puzzled xenobiologists for years. How did humans manage to spread across so much of the galaxy so quickly? 'Your species isn't particularly strong or fast or tough compared to others. No, we're not, Marcus agreed. But we're really good at changing the rules of the game. When we can't win by being stronger or faster, we win by being more creative. The group moved to the main observation deck, where the demonstration was still being discussed in excited voices across dozens of languages. News of the successful experiment was already spreading throughout the academy and beyond. Professor Veltar looked down at the arena where the Void Stalker was now lying peacefully in a corner, apparently taking a nap. Mr. Chen, I have to ask you something. When you first raised your hand in my lecture, did you already know this would work? Marcus considered the question carefully. I knew the principle would work. Humans have been using similar strategies for thousands of years, but I wasn't sure about the specific application to a Void Stalker. That's why we needed to test it. What other applications might there be? Any situation where you're facing something more powerful than you are. Pirates, hostile aliens, dangerous wildlife, even natural disasters. The key is always the same. Don't try to match their strengths. Instead, find ways to turn their strengths into weaknesses. Professor Jara joined the conversation, her tentacles writhing with scientific enthusiasm. We need to study this thoroughly. Document the techniques, test them against other predator species, develop training protocols. I'd be happy to help with that research, Marcus said. But I think there's something else you should consider too. What's that? Marcus looked around the observation deck at all the different species represented. Crystalline beings, tentacled creatures, bird-like entities, reptilian students, and dozens of others. You should probably add humans to your list of species to study. Not because we're apex predators in the traditional sense, but because we might represent something new. A species that specializes in not specializing. A predator that hunts by changing the definition of hunting. The professors exchanged glances, suddenly realizing that they might have been thinking about the human expansion across the galaxy in entirely the wrong way. You're suggesting that humans are a type of apex predator? Professor Veltar asked quietly. I'm suggesting that maybe the old categories don't apply to us. We don't fit the traditional predator-prey models because we don't follow traditional rules. We make our own rules. Marcus picked up his bag and headed toward the exit. Thank you for the opportunity to demonstrate this, Professor. It's been educational. As he left the observation deck, the professors and students remained behind, staring down at the peacefully sleeping Void Stalker and contemplating the implications of what they had just witnessed. Within hours, reports of the demonstration had reached every major academic institution in the galaxy. Within days, the first requests for human consultation on dangerous predator encounters began arriving at the academy. Within weeks, the phrase, human approach had entered the common vocabulary of galactic survival training. And in a small, unremarkable dorm room at the Galactic Academy,